Hi everybody, I'm Tim from troutandfeather.com, and in this fly tying tutorial we're going to tie EP's articulated streamer. Stay tuned. Here is a sneak peek of the EP articulated streamer. We have a lot of stuff going on here, but basically we just have two flies kind of attached to each other, and they're almost the same fly, and then we're going to finish them off with a flyman's sculpin helmet. So with that said, let's get a clean hook in the vise and start tying this one. We're going to start by tying the back section first. I'm going to be tying this in my Stoneflow transformer vise, and if the setup looks a little bit different, that's because I'm using the streamer head for this one. The whole gist of the transformer vise is that it comes with 3 different heads. This is the streamer head. I really like this, especially for these articulated patterns, just because it keeps everything nice and straight. The hook in the vise is a Honik competition hook. It's their H970BL. That BL designation stands for barbless. I'm tying this in a size 8, and both the rear and the front hook are size 8. Sometimes I'll go really large. We're talking down to size 4s. The smallest I tend to go with articulated streamers. Both of them will be a size 10. For my thread, I'm going to be going with the uni thread. This is 3/0 black. 3/0 definitely is a larger diameter, so keep that in mind. Sometimes I'll use more of a 6/0 on the back one and then a 3/0 on the front. A couple things to keep in mind with this 3/0 thread. It's strong, but it really builds up quickly, and that can be a pro or that can be a con depending on what you're kind of thinking about with the pattern you're choosing this 3/0 thread for. The one thing that I really like using the 3/0 for is whenever I'm tying with deer hair, or whenever I'm tying with materials that I really just need to bear down on the thread. So for this, I'm just going to start it near the front, trim it away. I'm going to start to work a little bit towards the rear. I'm going to stop around the halfway point, and I'm going to tie in my tailing fibers. Now the tail I'm going to be using for this is very simple. We're going to use some grizzly marabou. I love this. I love basically all of the grizzly marabous. This one's just the base color. It's kind of a grayish black. It's just straight grizzly. I get this from my buddy Joel Alsdorf from Alsdorf Genetic. I'll put a link down below that links to his website. Joel just has some awesome feathers. I buy all of my marabou from him. So if you do contact him, tell him you want the same stuff that Tim gets. He has a bunch of different colors, but the grizzly stuff, Joel, you know, that is my favorite. So I'm going to take 2 pieces that I've already stripped off. What I'm going to do is I'm going to place them together so that whenever I tie them on, they're basically going to splay apart from each other. Do I think that's the most critical piece of this fly? Do I think it's going to make the greatest difference? Probably not, but again, I just want to get some movement kind of initially into this fly. To determine their length, I'm just going to line them up so the tips go to around the bend, and I'm going to end at the eye. I'm just going to transfer it over to my left hand, and I want that back portion to be right where my tie off is going to finish. Now if you can see, I stopped my thread a little further up, so I'm just going to cheat forward, just lock them in place with a couple wraps, and now I can start wrapping back. I'm not too concerned about building up the body. That's something that I want to do. So I'm going to trim off there. Get those butt ends off. Go to the lock-in, and I go back forward just to get everything a little bit smoother. And at this point, I have some options. I can tie in a little bit of flash. I can get some rubber legs going in. It's really your choice. Now, what I'm going to be showing you in this video is just my base pattern. So I'm not going to get all the bells and whistles for a number of reasons. The reason I'm not going to tie in any type of a crystal flash or anything going on in the tail section is because of the body material. It's got a ton of flash in it already, so that's why I'm not going to worry too much about that. For the rubber legs, at times I'll put rubber legs back here, but I typically only put rubber legs in whenever I'm going for contrast. So say I want to get a fly that's going to have a really dark tail, then I might put something like a chartreuse rubber leg in. Or the opposite, if I have a chartreuse marabou tail, then I'll get a black rubber leg. In this case, I'm going for, in this pattern, this is going to be just kind of a base pattern that could represent a bait fish. It's going to have a little bit of flash, but this isn't something that I want to be seen as, we'll say, obtrusive in the water. I don't want it just screaming out to the fish as it moves. I'm going to add some rubber legs, but I'm going to add those later. Instead, the next material I'm going to add is an EP brush by Enrico Pigliucci. It's the Senyo Chromatic 1.5 inch wide. I really love these EP brushes. I've tried to make the brushes myself. I'm just, we'll say, mediocre at best at making them. Thus, I kind of defer to Enrico. He's got so many great brushes. I go back and forth between the 3 inch and the 1.5 inch, depending on the size hooks I'm using. In this case, size 8, I tend to go with the 1.5 inch. So it's basically just wire that's kind of twisted together. So I'm just going to find the point where the wire and the material kind of match up and lock in there and just wind forward. I'm going to stop right behind the eye, maybe a little bit closer. And then I'm just going to start winding this stuff forward. And as I wind, I'm just going to kind of palmer that material back a little bit. Now you can keep these really tight. You can kind of spread them apart. It's just depending on how much material you really want to kind of integrate into this pattern. I tend to kind of find a happy medium. I don't want that wire in necessarily touching wraps, but I do want to make sure that this material kind of gets played out. That's the key for me. I want to see this material, and at the very end I'll kind of go through with a piece of Velcro or something just to pick it out a little bit more, because I really want that stuff moving in the water. Now we're getting close. This will be my last wrap. So I got a couple wraps first behind it, 1 or 2 wraps in front, then finish off one more. And whenever I trim this, I'm not going to be using my typical fly tying scissors. I'm going to be using those with a serrated edge, just because that is wire underneath there. Okay, and at that point, I can kind of call it right now, and I could whip finish this off, though I do like rubber legs. So what I'm going to do is just grab some black rubber legs. I'm going to tie them around the thread. I'm going to place them around my thread, kind of a V shape. So now I can kind of move them anywhere I want. I'm just going to lock them in on front, or on top of that hook shank. Now if I just let go, you'll see they'll just kind of splay all over the place, and that's okay. I just want one going on one side of the hook and the other on the opposite. Now these two are laying really nice. If you look, they're kind of going back in a V pattern. All of my hooks, or all of my flies in my box, don't look like that. I have some that will kind of go straight up, some that go straight out. They don't always look the same, and trust me, don't feel obligated to making sure they look the same or they're perfect and everything's going great, because I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later. We want these flies to run in an almost erratic fashion, so sometimes it's better to have them kind of going all over the place, and there are instances where I prefer it up this way, because then whenever I strip this fly through the water, with every strip this will pull back and almost fight against itself to get back forward. In this case, I'm just going to add them for a little bit of vibration. So if they're both going back, that will work out fine. I'm going to build this up just a little bit, but with this 3/0, you'll realize it can build up very quickly. So I'm just going to put a couple whip finishes in. For my second whip finish, I'm going to add a little bit of Hansen hard as nails. I can see some of that Sally Hansen's definitely setting in. Whenever I go to super glue or UV resin, all this stuff together, sometimes I will add some additional head cement right there just to make sure all that stuff seals properly. Then the final step for this back piece, I'm just going to trim the legs, or trim these rubber legs. And the distance is truly up to you. I want it to be about the distance of the body, so I'm just going to go back to where the body and the marabou end. Just make a trim there. You'll see these legs kind of splay out nicely. And that's all there is to the back section of this articulated streamer. We have a new hook in the vise. No, we did not make a mistake. I'm not starting over. This is our front hook for the articulated streamer. It's the same hook that we used for the back one. It's the Honik H970BL. It's a size 8. I tied in some 3/0 black uni thread. I tied in right behind the eye of the hook. I ran back to about where I would tie in my tail and came back forward to establish the base. And now here is the fly that we previously tied. But it looks a little different. Here's all I did to it. I cut a 5-inch section of Orvis Super Strong 0X. It's about 16-pound test. I'll talk about why I use that one later in the video. I put it through the eye. I kind of doubled itself back over. I lined the two tips, and then I slid 2 red plastic beads over it. So now it's ready to go for our back section. So I'm just going to kind of place it, we'll say with the monofilament on top of our new shank. I'm just going to lock it in place with, not even lock it, just 3 really loose wraps. Then I'm going to take the hook, and what's nice about this Stonfo streamer head, there's a gap. So I can place that hook and place it down in the gap, then there's less of a chance of me hooking myself with that back one. Now let's talk a little bit about these beads. There are a couple different beads that you can use. I really like the 3D beads. This packaging's from Hairline. This color's olive. I'm using these, and the red ones are 3D beads as well. They're not from Hairline. I did just an eBay search. I found them. They came the whole way from China. They were a little bit more reasonably priced than the Hairline, though I use the Hairline a lot too. Colors I love are olive, black. I love this red, and I also love orange. And now we got to decide what's going to be our distance. Now, the whole point of the bead, aside from attracting fish, it will also help to prevent your back hook from fouling or attaching to your tippet that connects to your front hook. So even though this back hook's going to swing a little bit, we hope that these beads are going to help protect it from swinging too much. Now, on larger hooks, I will sometimes use 3 beads, though I'm using size 8 hooks now, so I'm just going to go with 2 beads in between. And I want to create a little bit of a distance from this tie-in point, in a sense, to where I'm going to lock in my thread. And I want these beads to be able to move just a little bit, because I almost want them sometimes to hit against each other. Are they going to hit against and attract fish? I don't know, but I want kind of that to happen. So you can see I'm just slowly pulling till I know whenever I tie off there, they're going to have a little bit of room to go back and forth. And now to just verify that, I'm going to tie back. And that's going to be my lock point. I can pick this up and I can see they'll move just a little bit, not a lot, but just a little bit. So this will swing around just a hair. Now to me, maybe that's swinging a little bit too much. And if so, we can simply just back it to our original tie-in point. Pull forward just a little bit. And then say, all right, that's good now. Let's go back. Right there. When I pick up, that's a little bit better. They still have just a little bit of room. This will still turn just a hair, but not so much that it will foul that front hook. So now that I have those kind of in place, let's talk about attaching our monofilament, because right now it's kind of locked underneath my thread. But is it really? If I continue tying and I finish my fly, there's a risk of this back hook pulling out, because that monofilament sometimes can pull out. I really don't want to be in a situation where that will ever happen. Every time I go out fishing, I'll always make sure I grab this back hook in a safe manner and give it a really hard jerk, because I do not want it pulling out when I have the fish of a lifetime attached to it. So really kind of keep that in mind and put some insurance or some preventative measures in place. For me, I like to coat this thread with some type of a glue. I go back and forth between this Zappa glue. This is not a head cement, this is a super glue. What's great about this is it really is super secure. However, we're making a fly tying video and it doesn't dry necessarily as fast. Whenever I'm using super glue, I'm probably tying a bunch of these. I would get to this point, coat it with super glue, wrap over it and back, and then put a whip finish and then let it dry and tie another one. For the purposes of this video, and because I really do use a lot of this stuff, I'm going to use this Solarize UV Cure. Its size is ultra thin. It's called Bone Dry. I made a previous video on it. I really love this stuff. I use it for a lot. What's great about it is there's a very slick applicator brush. Some people have commented that I must have cut that down, but I didn't. This is exactly how it came in mine. So to kind of use this stuff, what I'm going to do is just coat all of this thread So I want it so it's all shiny. I don't care if I have some extra globs because it's just going to be underneath all of my body material. So I'm just going to coat it completely. There we go. Put that back on the bottle, grab my UV torch, hit it for around 5, 6, 7 seconds. I don't have to go for the full 10 seconds because I'm going to return to it here in a second. Now I'm going to go to the tag end of my mono and just kind of trim it a little bit. Then I'm going to take the mono and I'm going to double it back over itself. Again, I don't know, maybe just because I want to make sure nothing's going to happen. Now if you look, I didn't trim it enough, so let me just get rid of that. Go back to that point. Same as before, just return to it. Just real quick. And there we go. Now we can finish the fly. So I'm just going to advance my thread rearward. This time I'm going to go back to my marabou. Same stuff that I get from my buddy Joel at Allsdorf Genetic, except I'm just going to take one piece because I don't want to completely cover those red beads. I want them to be seen through the tail. So I basically just want this tail to go back and kind of cover my previous head of the back fly. So I'm just going to bring it back that far, about to there. Lock it in place. Kind of want that splayed out a little bit. Again, not too worried about the front section because I know it's going to get covered with all of my body material. Body material, same as before. The EP brush, same color as before too. You can vary it though. Don't hesitate to do that. I'm going to lock that right up against the tail. Then when I advance my thread, I'm just going to go up to about that point there. I need to leave a substantial portion because I'm going to be adding this sculpin helmet at the end. And this sculpin helmet's got to go the whole way to there. So kind of take a peek at where I have to be. So I need it to go there, so I'm only going to be advancing my body material almost halfway. I don't need to go the whole way this time because it's going to be covered by that helmet. So let me start wrapping. Same as before, just palmer some of that material back. I can end it right there. So a few wraps behind it, a few wraps in front. Sometimes whenever you trim it, I'm not sure if I mentioned this on the previous, on that back hook, there'll be a little bit of that brush sticking up and I just like to bend that back. Same as before, I want to kind of incorporate some type of a rubber leg in the front. So I'm going to just fold it over my thread, place one wrap down, let go, and just separate them. One on camera side, one on my side. Just wrap. I can let them kind of splay out this time because that sculpin helmet's going to push them back. I'm just going to wrap forward, build this up a little bit because I have to get a little bit of area to allow my sculpin helmet to attach to. I'm going to be putting some super glue on here. It's a pretty ugly head there. I was trying to talk and tie and I just kind of lost it there for a second. But whenever I attach this sculpin head, I'm going to be super gluing it on. So I want to make sure that I have some material there and some thread that it can attach to and everything will just kind of lock in place. Now before I get it in there, I'm going to cut these rubber legs. Same as before, I'm just going to hold on to them, figure out a nice point where the marabou and the body meet, trim there. So now if you take a peek at it, it looks pretty uniform, pretty consistent front and back. But before I attach my sculpin helmet, I'm going to actually invert this. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the notion of which way you want to attach your helmet. But whenever you attach your helmet, if you look inside of it, you'll see that this bottom portion has a lot more weight than the top portion. And by top portion, that's going to be the side that has eyes. So I'm going to be attaching it just like this. So I'm going to start prepping for this. I got to get the eyes on and get everything moving. So let me prep that helmet, and then we'll continue this pattern. It's time to finish the fly, and I'm going to be adding a sculpin helmet. The size is small, the color is brown. I typically will go back and forth between a small helmet and a large helmet, depending on how much weight I'm going for. And that's the main reason why I'm going to be using this helmet. Not because I'm trying to represent a sculpin, but because I want more weight at the front of the fly. Now I'm going to be placing this helmet in place so these eyes are up and the eyes are on hook point side. By doing that, it's going to allow this fly to ride hook point up. So I've attached the eyes already. They're not completely locked, at least not in my mind. I'm going to return to my Zap-A-Gap with a brush. This is super glue. And I'm really going to be generous with this super glue. What I'm going to do is just coat all around the head of this fly. I don't necessarily want it in the eye of the hook, but I want it everywhere else. Alright, once I have that in place, let's close the bottle. I don't want that leaking all over my bench. I'm going to grab this sculpin helmet, and I really want to make sure that when I push it on so I create a little bit of room at the hook eye. Just like that. Be careful when you're pushing it on. Make sure your hook is locked in the vise. You do not want to accidentally hook yourself. These are such sharp hooks. Now that I have a little bit of room at the front, I can use my 3/0. Now if you want to use 6/0, go for it. It might be a little bit easier. Just going to place 3 wraps. That's it, no more than that. I'll trim it all off at the end. I'm going to just add a little bit of Sally Hansen on it. I don't need too much, but I just want to make sure that everything kind of gets locked in place. I'm going to do a whip finish. I'm just going for around 4 turns. And most importantly, make sure when you're doing that, let's see if I can just get 3 nice ones in there. I want to make sure I leave room to get my tippet in place. Because if you can't get your tippet on, you are going to be out of luck. Alright, so I got my thread all off. Let me clean that up just a little bit. I can definitely get tippet through there. I can just grab my 16-pound just to check. It's possible. So to finish this off, what I'm going to do is go back to my super glue, and I want to super glue these eyes on. I don't want them coming off. Though they have a little bit of adhesive on the back whenever you get them from Flymen, I want to make sure that they are there for good. So I'll super glue them from the top. I put a little super glue on before I attach them too. So they are good. I can put a little bit of super glue over my wraps. To clean it out, I'm just going to grab that 16-pound one more time. Put it through there. Hope some of that super glue holds onto it. And now I have my finished fly. So let me take this out. I'll put it on top of my vise. And there, we'll see, there you go. So we have our EP articulated streamer. It's got 2 hooks, just a lot of stuff going on. And then I really love that sculpin head at the front to add that weight, give it a nice kind of aerodynamic look, and it's going to fish well. I'm going to be putting this into my box and probably fishing it really soon. So let's change the camera angle and talk a little bit more about some fly tying variations and how to fish this pattern. So that's all there is to the EP's articulated streamer. Now let me first tell you, EP, what's that stand for? It's the Enrico Pugliese, because I'm using one of those dubbing brushes that you can purchase from Enrico. So I felt like that would be the appropriate name, but if there's another name for this streamer, please let me know. It's been very tricky trying to keep up with all these streamer names over the last few years. There are just a crazy amount of names. There's a crazy amount of articulated streamers out there. I figured I'd give credit to Enrico, at least because he came up with that dubbing brush and it works so well with this style of fly. But I apologize if it's something else. Sorry guys. Now let's talk a little bit about this. We'll first talk about the tying, and you probably noticed I didn't overthink this fly. Whenever I first started getting into articulated streamers, they seemed really complicated to me, and you can make them very complicated, trust me. But from a fishing perspective, I choose not to do that. Now I wanted this one to be kind of a basic one because this is the first articulated streamer that I featured on my website, Trout and Feather. And some of my friends were telling me, please don't put them out there because we catch definitely a lot of large trout on these streamers. They've worked really well for me over the last couple of years, and I encourage you to look into them as well. Now whenever it comes to modifying them or coming up with any fly tying variations, by all means play around with the dubbing, play around with the body, play around with the tail and the materials and the colors. You can probably figure out there are lots of different options. In this video I chose to have more of, we'll say, a heavier head, and in that case I can fish this on a floating fly line, and whenever I'm pulling that fly towards me, it's kind of going up and then jigging down in a sense. But you can also tie these with no weight on the head whatsoever or very little weight on the fly, and then fish them with a sinking fly line so that in a sense they're kind of floating up and the fly line's pulling them down. So you have some different options there, and by all means don't overthink it. There's probably too many options for these flies out there. The one option that I first want to kind of talk about and discuss a little bit was the connection between the two hooks. And for that connection, I chose in this video to use just a fluorocarbon or some type of a monofilament, a heavier one, somewhere around 16 to 20 pounds. I like that because it really provides some durability and it still allows for some movement between the two hooks. In my first try at articulated streamers, I went with backing because I thought, geez, backing would be so great. It would allow just a lot of movement between the two, and it worked really well, except I used the fly for a couple months and I got to a spot where I eventually did catch a large fish, but not on that fly because I pulled out one of my articulated streamers. It was one of my, we'll say, popular ones I've been using for a while, and for some just strange reason, I decided to check the connection between the two. And I pulled and it just snapped right off. So from that point forward, I've shied away from using backing. I know a lot of tyers out there will use something called beat-alon, and that's something else to investigate as well. I believe it may allow for a little bit more flexibility between the two. But if you have any other suggestions for others out there on what to use for that connection, please by all means mention it down below in the comment section just to see what some of the other options are that are out there. The other thing that I want to mention is that whenever I was kind of first experimenting with articulated streamers, I was tying them with a shank at the front and a hook at the back. And whenever I was doing that, I was doing okay, especially whenever I was catching rainbows. But for some reason, I missed a number of large brown trout, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. And I talked to one of my buddies, and my buddy Chuck said to me, "You're fishing for brown trout. Do you think they could be just really attacking this as a bait fish near its head, and you don't have a hook up there?" Sure enough, I changed it to a 2-hook style, the one that you saw in the fly tying video, and I haven't had nearly as many problems with brown trout especially as I had with some of my early articulated streamers. So that's something else to consider. Now, whenever we talk about this from a fishing perspective, when we talk about, geez, let's just start off with what kind of rod do you want to use, because that could kind of just open up another kind of realm. I typically will fish these with a 6-weight fly rod, though I'm not afraid to even mess around with something like a, we'll say, a European or tightline nymphing rod. You got to be creative in how you get this fly out there, but it can be done with a variety of different rods. Whenever I'm fishing this, I really love to fish these patterns when the water's a little bit high or a little bit off color. If it's clear water, then I'm probably going to be, maybe focusing on these earlier in the day or later on in the day. But I really tend to fish these maybe where tributaries enter main rivers, or I'll fish them along the banks, or I'll use it as a searching pattern, or if I'm at kind of the end of a pool in the tail out section, I'll kind of let it swing and then I'll strip it away from that tail out, kind of like a bait fish that's about to go over the edge in a sense. But I've had a lot of fun fishing these, and I've even fished the articulated ones kind of as, I don't want to say a dead drift, but a little bit more of a dead drift where I'll let it drift for a little bit, then maybe give my rod some twitches or my line, just a couple pulls, and then strip it in towards me and see what can happen. Now there's all kinds of other options that you have whenever we're talking about what can happen with the fly whenever it's moving in the water, because we want it to appear as maybe a wounded bait fish, or just, we want it to appear almost sporadic. So don't be afraid to mess around with it. Maybe start adding in some type of, we'll say maybe wood duck wings on the side, maybe splayed out, just to kind of cause it to run a little bit of erratic. Or maybe you can put some deer hair on the top, or deer hair splaying out as well. So you got a lot of options there. The final piece that I'll kind of talk about, and it's almost a funny story in a sense. I was tying at one of the fly tying symposiums, and my tying partner sitting next to me was my buddy Josh Miller, and he's a member of Fly Fishing Team USA. And at one point he came up to me and he said, "Hey Tim, I got to tell you something. I'm looking at some of these streamers. I want you to know you're tying them upside down." And I was like, "What are you talking about, Josh?" And I trust him, so let's first preface it with that. And whenever he looked at the fly, he noticed that I was using one of the Flymen heads on it, and based on how it was, the head would sit and my hook was down on the bottom, so it wasn't riding hook point up. And I immediately said to him, no, I was tying that intentionally that way because I've been watching a lot of Kelly Gallup videos, and you probably watched some of his videos too. And depending on how you're fishing this fly, Kelly likes to fish a lot of his streamers in, we'll say, deeper water with that hook point down, because he's not allowing this to touch the bottom. So don't be afraid to kind of decide which one's better for you. In my box, I have both styles. I have some where they'll ride hook point up, and I like those ones a lot, and I think Josh does too, because those are the types of streamers that you can cast out, and you can let them kind of sit at the bottom of a pool almost, and just really slowly strip them up. And you can do the same if you're fishing in a still water type of situation. But I also really love those that have both hooks pointing down, where I know I'm not going to allow that fly to get to the bottom. I don't have to worry about it snagging anything, and I definitely feel very confident with those flies too. There's a Kelly Gallup video that I reference. I'll see if I can kind of link it down below in the description of this video where he talks about that. It's a great video, and if you know of it, can you mention it down in the comment section, because it's one that kind of really got me thinking, not even just initially about these articulated streamers, just in my entire design of them. So there's a lot to these. I could probably go on for another 20 minutes, but I would bore all of you to death. So in my next articulated streamer video, I'll try to make it a little bit more advanced, and we'll go on from there. Well, with all that said, thank you so much for watching this video. And if you'd like to check out more like it, please check out my website, which is troutandfeather.com. When you're there on the homepage, scroll down to the bottom, enter your email address, and you can sign up for occasional updates about new videos, any tying demos, or any shows where I'll be featured. If you're into social media, you can find Trout and Feather on both Instagram and on Facebook. If you have any comments or questions, you can email me at tcammisa@gmail.com. That email's found below. Or by all means, please leave it down below in the comments section. I kind of look at that as a resource section for everybody to learn from, including myself. Once again, thank you so much, everybody, and I'll see all of you next time.